Welcome back to the Biohacks podcast. Today we are joined by Mike Macfarlane, and we're going to be talking how to stay fit and healthy and injury-free when you do contact sports. So Mike was basically a professional rugby player, and we're going to be delving into some of his insights, thoughts, and feedback for any contact sports athletes out there on kind of how to stay fit and healthy. So Mike, thanks for joining us.
No worries, good to be here.
Do you want to give, it's good to, so everyone has a bit of context about your rugby background. Do you want to give us a bit of the timeline, kind of from start to where you are now?
Yeah, so I picked up rugby when I was sort of 5-6 years old, joining local minis, and then sort of played all the way through school. I was lucky enough to play with you, South East England under 16s or under 18s, something like that. Yeah. Then was lucky enough to get picked for England under 18s as a schoolboy, and then went off to Loughborough University, which was when we met properly, and then played rugby all throughout Loughborough, and then went and played championship rugby after that. Played rugby sort of seriously after uni. Played sort of eight or 9 seasons of championship / national one style rugby, and then was playing a dropout from full time. I was playing at Ealing Trailfinders, and the second game of the season ruptured my cruciate ligament. So that was that. I decided to knock it on the head and sort of go and look for an alternative career, as it were.
Okay, brilliant. And so obviously today we're going to be talking about injuries. So what kind of, do you want to give us a bit of a rundown of the injuries that you've had throughout that kind of whole period, or obviously throughout that timeline? Like what big injuries have you had?
Yeah, so I've been lucky in a sense. So I very rarely got injured. The only 2 injuries I had required surgery. So dislocated shoulder, where I had a labral tear and had to have an operation to repair the cartilage in that, and then cruciate ligament at the end of my career.
Like shoulder and knee, basically, which is, I guess, is the common one for the 2 common ones, obviously, for most rugby.
Exactly, yeah. So, and other than that, I was always, touch wood, I was always injury free. I got little niggles like you always do. You never play a season feeling fresh and healthy. You've always got something that happens. But I was never regularly. You know what I'm talking about. Where there's always those players that are out for 3 weeks and they play for 2 weeks and they're out for another 2 weeks. I was lucky in that sense. I just sort of got the big 2 blows, really.
And I guess it's one of those weird ones where it comes with the territory, doesn't it? I guess playing at a high standard, training like X amount of days a week, like pretty much doing something every day, really, aren't you? Like, I know we were, and we'll delve into kind of a bit more about the science and the periodization and what we used to do, and then what you kind of think, actually, kind of having been through the system, what you think the optimal setup is, obviously, to stay fit and healthy. But I guess it kind of comes with the territory, doesn't it? And I guess there's that. Rugby is a little bit of the old school mentality, kind of work hard. What they used to be, that kind of work hard, work until you break type of thing. Would you agree with that? Like that's
definitely. I think if you look at the players that sort of make top flight rugby, they're usually the ones that are resilient, and they're the ones that can get through all the training sessions and sort of survive their career, as it were, without getting injured. There's quite a few players you see play top flight rugby and they get a big injury and that's it. You never see them again. Not because they're not playing, they're still playing Premiership, but it's that continuity of playing week in, week out. I think a lot of minutes count, don't they? Yeah. If you're constantly always on the pitch playing rugby, I think that's where you improve. And everything else, the training, the weights and all of that's maintaining your conditioning element to extent, but also it's keeping you injury free, isn't it? And if you're able to get on the pitch, that's when you learn and that's when you get better.
Definitely. So let's delve into a little bit into sort of like kind of just to give a bit of a framework for people. So let's start with the problems. So problems, we'll talk about shoulder and knee, and then we'll kind of go into maybe into the solution, like how we kind of prevent kind of getting into that space in the first place. So with the shoulder, so obviously it was a subluxation, right? Was that what you had?
Yeah. So I had a dislocation, and then I rehabbed, and then I actually played I think I played half a season of rugby, and then I had 2. Yeah, I had 2 subluxes, and then another dislocation.
And what year was this? Sorry.
This was, so it would have been my second year of uni. So it would have been, what year did we go? 2009.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's been about 2010, 11.
Okay. And so first it was a dislocation, and then you played on, and then that then led on to it deteriorating and being made worse.
Yeah, So basically, what happened? I rehabbed it for 4 or 5 weeks. Essentially, the way the shoulder's structured, it's like an egg sitting in an egg cup, with the sort of cartilage around the outside of the egg. And if you get a chip, if that egg cup chips, you can make the muscles as strong as you like. But if you get hit at that angle where the shoulder joint pushes into that gap, there's nothing you can do really. It will just pop out. So the only real thing you can do is get surgery, where essentially they put some sort of fake tissue over that cartilage to act as a labrum, which is the sort of that block to stop it coming out. And that's the only thing that really stops it, to be honest.
And looking back on yourself in that situation, so like looking back on you, like even with just the first dislocation, say there's somebody out there who's dislocated their shoulder, or rugby players listening, or any type of injury, I guess, within sport, like what advice would you have given to yourself? Like, would you have been able to prevent having had surgery if there were things that you could have done differently? Like, would you have stopped?
I mean, yeah, it's funny because it's a rugby injury, or it's a contact injury. If you're a rower, actually, there's no need to get a labral repair. You can crack on because you're not going to get the impact that pops the shoulder out. But sort of my advice to people that have done it in future, guys that play with rugby clubs that dislocated their shoulder and think, I'm just going to rehab it. If you get a scan and you see there's a labral tear there and you've got a torn cartilage, you just get it operated on. It's going to, at some point or other, if you're still playing rugby and you're still doing contact, if you hit someone hard enough, it's going to pop out. So that's my advice really. If there's any hint of a torn cartilage in the shoulder, then it's always best just to get it operated on really. And it's arthroscopic, it's all keyhole. I was awake for the surgery. It was 45 minutes long and that was it.
Okay. So you're kind of in and out. And I guess then the rehab after, was that you out for the rest of the season, or like what was
it's 3 months really. So it's not even a season breaker if you do it. I decided to get it operated on in January. It would have been January 2011. I actually dislocated it in the pre-season before that, so I actually played half the season, just over half the season with it sort of injured really. But had I done it in pre-season, I'd have been back by January. But I was lucky in the time when it happened. The time that it happened meant I was out for the rest of the season, so I actually got a good 6 months on it. 7 months really before the next season started again.
Yeah. And I guess in terms of prehab, like stopping people getting to that space, like what advice would you give? Like, it's obviously like spending time focusing on creating stability in the shoulder, like, and whether is that, would you advise like staying away from bodybuilding type routines and like
so the biggest advice I got really was from a physio, a guy I still see called Brett. He was the ex-Wasp physio in the sevens, and he's really, really top lad. And he basically said, the exercises that anyone that does contact, the exercises you do where your shoulder's fixed, like a fixed bar bench press, your shoulder isn't able to move around that range of motion. Move it to dumbbells. If you look at the plane of the movement of dumbbells, the dumbbells don't stay in a straight line going up and down. They move in a sort of a semicircular, lunar sort of shape. And that enables your shoulder joint to move freely. And so the biggest sort of tip I took from that was for all the training that you do, it doesn't mean you go and just get your TheraBands out and that's it. You can still, lift heavy weights. You just got to be sensible about it and actually look at the range of motion of the shoulder. I
think it's actually quite important, isn't it? This is a really good point actually that you've made, is that when you're doing, like, people associate physiotherapy or prehab with, like, I don't know if this is me making an assumption, but people associate it with like low magnitude type TheraBand exercises, which is obviously the point that we're making there. And actually what we're trying to do is we're trying to mimic the demands of the environment in which we're putting the tissues, joint architecture in. And I guess on some level, it's about trying to mimic that, not in terms of only of the angles and position, but obviously in terms of magnitude and the forces that are going to be going through that joint. So it's not a case of just doing like low intensity stuff. Like, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. It's about taking it through the correct planes of action associated with the correct level of stability, obviously with the appropriate amount of magnitude in terms of force, weight, however you want to quantify it. I think that's a really
exactly
good point.
both my injuries, I've done a lot of reading. Doing a sport related degree, you're looking at a lot of anatomy and physiology. I was always looking into the rehab and sort of designing my own program along with the physios and people like that I spoke to. But if you look at studies, a lot of the TheraBand and all that, work, like you said, the light resistance, high reps work. That's only really proven to work in the initial stages in the rehab. If you've got a fully functioning joint, knee or shoulder, whatever it is, and you just get these little TheraBands on, you'll probably activate the muscle in the first couple of minutes. But once you've done that, you need to stimulate it after that, don't you? You see, there's always these players in the gym, and every day, they do all their rotator cuff exercises and all that with their bands. Other than maybe activating the muscle to train, it doesn't really have a benefit in injury prevention after that. Once you've got it, then you need to actually load the shoulder up and get it working through its range of motion to really get strong.
And mimic the demands of the environment. It's a really good point for anybody listening. Like, all those types of exercises are fine as a warm up, but you need to be putting the joint through range with load and intensity to mimic the demands of the environment. So it's a really good point. Let's go into when was the knee injury? When did that happen?
Knee injury would have been 2016.
Was that non-contact? Was it ACL non-contact or?
No. So it was, again, I think I did it in the week and I played a game, and that's when I realised it was bad. Right. So it was actually, initially it was non-contact, sidestep. I jumped up, caught a pass towards me that was going over my head. So it was not a very good pass. Jumped up, caught it just above my head, and then sort of as I looked down, saw there was a player in front of me, and then went to step as I was landing.
Yeah.
And you sort of misjudged where the floor was, and I ended up landing with a dead straight leg. It's a weird feeling. I'm sure you know the feelings you've done as well, but it felt to me as though if that's my knee, it just sort of slipped to the side and then come back. It was odd because I did it, and I felt really sharp pain at the time, and then I sort of walked it off, and I felt all right, and then I was fine. Trained in the week. The knee was really swollen, but we got the swelling down with ibuprofen and icing and stuff, and then played at the weekend. And in the last sort of play of the game, it wasn't even really contact. Someone just was slowing. The ball had been passed in front of me. I was in defence, and the player that had just passed the ball in front of me just slowed down and almost came to a stop. And a bit of his knee just knocked the inside of my knee ever so slightly, and it wasn't intentional. And my knee just went again, completely crumbled. And so at that point, we got the scan, and I totally ruptured the cruciate ligament. So the thinking was it was done in the week, or it was pretty much done in the week.
Partially.
And maybe,
still hanging on by a thread.
Like a grade 2 tear with a bit left on. And then the last bit sort of finished it off, really.
Yeah.
And again, I had an option of maybe rehabbing without, the physio at the time thought he's seen a lot of rugby players that have sort of good hamstring strength can rehab without ACLs. But at the age of sort of 27, I just thought there's no point. I'll get it done properly. The last thing you want is getting to the age of 50, 60, going on a skiing holiday with your wife and kids, thinking you're all fine, and then first turn of the slopes and you sort of
end up here.
Buckle over. So I thought for the longevity of everything, it's best to just get it done. And I played 3 or 4 seasons since then, but no problem whatsoever.
And what was the kind of process for that? So obviously you had the 2 games, got injured. Did you immediately have the surgery?
Yeah. So basically, I was really lucky. Got and saw one of the top 2 surgeons in the country that does a lot of footballers and rugby players and things like that. And essentially, I had 2 weeks to get the swelling down as much as possible. They'll operate on you as soon as possible, but your outcomes are better if the knee is in a good condition going into the operation. Obviously, that's relative because you've got a ruptured cruciate in there, but You need to get the swelling down and sort of start your prehab exercises and get the muscles functioning properly before they'll operate, which I did. And it was annoying really, because I sort of went into the operation thinking, I could probably just rehab this and carry on, because it was actually in a good state. And then I had the operation, and that's minimum 9 months. Minimum 9 months rehab, ideally a year. And I had it done. The operation was in October, and I actually played in September, so I had 11 months off in the end. Just a time I'd advise having a year off for sort of reconstructive surgery like that. I don't think, unless you're getting paid millions and millions of pounds to play a sport, I wouldn't say to anyone, I'll get back in 6 months. The research says you can do it, but actually, if you look at the re-injury occurrences,
much higher.
They go down considerably after a year.
Yep. Spend the time and don't rush the process, I guess, unless you've got unless you've got the kind of top level support team around you who are like.
But also, at the end of the day, without getting too technical, when you have a reconstruction like a cruciate ligament where they're putting a bit of your hamstring into your knee to act as the ligament, that's got no nerve endings in it. It's essentially a sort of just a piece of tissue that's not connected to any part of your body, and it takes 12 months for your body to start treating it like a ligament, and for you to actually get any sort of neural pathways going through it. Yeah. So you can play at 6 months, but it's not connected to any of your body. It's just a piece of tissue. So, there's no sort of feedback or anything like that. So that's something you can't rehab.
Yeah. And I guess we have to remember we're biological systems, aren't we? Like things don't just suddenly, we're not mechanical. You don't just flick a switch and suddenly like turns on or turn off. I guess it's like the biology takes time, and it's for things to reintegrate in your body. And I guess it's like trying not to rush that process, I guess, is what we're.
Oh, exactly. I think you've got to, when you get an injury, regardless of what it is, you've got to look at what's injured. If it's muscular, you can get back pretty quick. You can train a muscle. The muscle can sort of repair very fast. If it's a tendon and ligament, it takes a bit longer, doesn't it? But actually, at the end of the day, if you're looking at something like a piece of cartilage, cartilage doesn't really repair. So you've got to be mindful of what you're injured and sensible with your time scales. Really, you can't just rehab quickly and think, it feels fine now, and get out there and train. You've got to go through the processes and make sure it's right.
Would there be, like looking back on yourself now, would there have been something you'd been doing differently prior to the knee injury to stop yourself from ending up in that space? Like I don't know what kind of condition you were in, or like were you overtraining, or do you just think it's a freak accident? Like what's the? Yeah, so
I put it down. I put my knee injury. There's three ways. There are three sort of, you have a lot of time when you're injured, as you're sort of, everyone else is out training and doing their bits, and you're sort of sat in the physio room, sort of waiting to see physio, and you have a lot of time to think. There are three things I think sort of caused the injury. Number one could have been a freak injury. There's people that, there's movements that you make that you do by mistake, and there's no amount of rehab or anything like that could have stopped that. You put a bit of force through that ligament, and they can't handle, and it will tear.
I guess I was going to say, no, that's just because it'd be good to delve in on each of these. So that's a really good point, is that when you're competing, especially even at a high level, like the demands that are placed on the body when you're competing and obviously competing, and you're not thinking about the body, you're thinking about the goal at hand. Like the position your body gets thrown into, like you can never really mimic or simulate in training, right? That's because competition is you at your peak, or should be you at your peak performance, I guess. And the point that Mike's making is that sometimes, like in terms of freak accidents, your body in competition gets thrown into positions that you're never going to see at any other state. Your body's never going to see at any other stage in its life cycle, if you know what I mean. So I guess it's being mindful of. God, what were you going to say?
No, I was going to say that, and that's the thing, really. There's the only sort of real thing I think you can do maybe is movement analysis. If you teach your body movement patterns, but that takes time, and actually, really everyone should be learning to move properly. And I think having worked in schools and things like that, at rugby coaching things, I think that one thing, this is a massive side note, but massive area that everyone misses. PE. From the young age is movement. Kids aren't taught to move.
I think Jonas Jonas Dodu and the guys at Speedworks, they're doing a lot on this at the minute, and they're basically looking at deceleration forces and how obviously that, because obviously so many games and team sports are based around change of direction. We've looked at linear speed
and obviously those guys have looked at it in terms of an athletics point of view, but I think one of the most important things for team sport players is that, and obviously this is the area that sports science needs to really start delving into now, is change of direction. How do you change direction better? How do you improve athletes change of direction? How do you protect them from getting injured at the same time as well? I guess that needs to be the kind of next. And obviously some of that comes with the technology and obviously slow motion cameras and all the dartfish type things that can do the angle analysis, etc. But obviously putting into practice those types of drills, just like you see in the NFL, like all those kind of cutting drills, etc. Like that kind of stuff is super important to mimic the demands of the environment and to help players improve, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and that's the thing, really. I think that everyone needs to learn to move. You need to be able to adapt to what you're doing. If you look at something you're doing, like martial arts, essentially all your training, a lot of the training is movement, isn't it? It's movement, where to move, how to move, what to do. And then you go into a team sport and you're just expected to be able to run and change direction.
100%.
So actually, I think that a lot more time should be focused on people learning to essentially be efficient. You know, 100%. you can. Lots of people think to get faster, for example. Let's take sort of a linear acceleration over 30 meters. Lots of people think, right, actually, if I just get stronger and more powerful, then I'll run faster. But actually, if you look at all the wasted energy in that person's running mechanics, actually, before they even step foot on a plyo box or inside a squat rack or anything like that, if they just spent a few weeks learning to move effectively, they'd be quicker without being any stronger or anything like that. You know, and that's I think where rugby sort of gets lost a bit.
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, rugby is top of its game, and it can get players fit. You know, it's really good at sort of all that high intensity movement. It's brilliant getting players strong. But actually, you see so many players. Well, I do anyway. You know, watching rugby on a Saturday, and you see them sort of moving, and you think, how is he? He looks like, or sometimes they look surprised to be sprinting. Do you know what I mean? You know, you see, especially a front row player, and you think, actually, you know, you're on the field not only to scrummage and to do line outs and things like that, but you also got to run. And you know, if people focus on that, and I'm not saying do it in place of anything else, but on top of, actually, you end up being a lot more efficient.
Definitely. No, it's really, really great points there. Really, that's really insightful. What was your second kind of viewpoint? What was the?
Yeah, so it was my first season there, and essentially what happened was the S&C coach had decided that that everyone's posterior chains were sort of subpar, as it were. Everyone was very quad dominant, and I'm not casting blame at all, but a net was thrown over everyone, and everyone was told that, right, you know, your hamstrings, your glutes, and everything, everyone's too weak. So we're going to
type of approach.
Yeah, exactly. And so everyone started from the bottom in terms of posterior chain loading. So I went, and actually myself, I was sort of, having done a degree in sport and things like that, you know, I was sort of focused on my posterior chain, hamstrings, glutes, and all that sort of stuff, and made sure that they were sort of in good condition. And I personally, looking back, I think that I should have probably pushed harder to have carried on that sort of training, because I went from, you know, sort of deadlifting 3 times the amount in the pre-season before I turned up to the club, to then turning up to the sort of first couple of weeks of pre-season, you know, sort of basically being deloaded with just movement patterns on a bar. I think maybe that giving your hamstrings your biggest stabilizer of your knee joint, but actually what happened was my hamstrings detrained. And so maybe the load that the hamstrings would have taken in that side step, they couldn't take at that time. So that's when it sort of shifted across to the cruciate ligament, which it can handle.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess suddenly, like, some of that, like, what kind of period do you think that they were kind of detrained for? Because obviously you'd had a certain level of conditioning in the run up to that, and then obviously being taken back down to base level. Exactly like what we were saying earlier, that there is a level of magnitude that needs to be satisfied, especially with a big person like yourself. It's going to be like you're the forces that you kind of create just from sheer body weight, and because of how explosive and how strong you are,
like it has to meet those demands. And I guess if you're suddenly there back down doing like barbell weight type of stuff, I guess it's not meeting that force or magnitude requirement. So I think it's
yeah, exactly. And actually, you know, that sort of ties into the whole movement pattern. Your body will remember a movement and try and generate that amount of force. And it will do that, not knowing that your hamstrings are maybe, or, you know, any part of your body is sort of detrained. And you see it in a lot of sort of veterans rugby. Whenever whenever I speak to guys that have sort of gone out and played a game for their old boys or anything like that, you know, you always get injured because they see a gap, they accelerate for it in the way that they used to have done 5 years ago, and that's it. Your calf goes pop. So that's, you know, it's exactly that really, and I think that may be what happened to me.
Yeah, sorry, it's just like I get this image. There's quite a few guys from my old rugby club I remember, and that is a very common thing. They've all got like their hamstrings are basically like just still attached.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, cool. No, that's really insightful. What was the kind of third final point?
The third was that long story short, when I moved from Loughborough, I went to a club called Esher. They're in the Championship. Unfortunately, 2 seasons later, we got relegated, and then I moved to a team in National 1, and then I moved to a team back in the Championship again. And it was my first season back in the Championship, and I was aware of sort of physicality of that league compared with the league below. So I really sort of put an emphasis on sort of bulking up. And so I'd gone from like 104, 105 kilos to like almost 110 in that sort of pre-season. I'm lucky in the sense that I've sort of given, I can sort of put muscle on relatively quickly. I can sort of spend a period of time sort of eating a lot and training a lot, and I can put a lot of weight on very quickly, which in hindsight is probably not good for the sort of back to the movement analysis and things like that. If you're a lot heavier in a short space of time, that load that you're putting through your body, you know, the tendons and the ligaments in your body take a lot longer to adapt to that load. So if you do put weight on, whether it's body fat or muscle mass, it's not necessarily, there's not necessarily an absolute difference at that period of time, in the short space of time, because you need time for the tendons and the ligaments to sort of strengthen and get used to that.
I guess, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, I was going to say it's like the delayed effects, and obviously, like we said about biological systems, like things that I've seen this a lot in terms of strength and conditioning. Like when change happens, when it happens quickly, that's where the problems normally lie, because obviously the body takes time to adapt and it takes time to get used to the new change. So you basically think that obviously suddenly the increase in weight, because of your being aware that physicality was going to be a much bigger issue in this kind of higher league. And that's obviously it's a great thing. Obviously, it allows you to be more physical and it allows you to kind of hold your own. But then obviously with that, and this is why I try and stay away from like good or bad, but obviously the debt that comes with that, there's obviously always a price to pay, is that potentially body was not used to having to carry that extra load, hadn't had time to adapt, hadn't had the kind of correct parameters put in place for you to be able to kind of handle the new version of you, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the majority of the weight I put on was on my upper body as well. So, yeah, if you think actually, had it been around my legs, you could argue that the muscle strength could have supported the knee better. But, you know, when it's chest and shoulders and back, actually that weight is only force going through the knee, and it doesn't really help. Yeah. So, you know, it could be a combination of the three. It could have been one. You know, you just don't know. But it's good to have an idea of maybe why that might have happened.
Definitely. And some of the thing, I guess, from the kind of real, we're going to look to wrap up in a minute, but just the kind of real takeaway point, obviously, from this conversation is that it takes time. Like, don't try and rush things, I guess, is what we're trying to say. I guess there's some level of the body takes time to adapt, and you have to be very clear about what the goals and outcomes that you're looking for, but also don't try and rush things. Like, take the time, spend the time, don't overtrain. Obviously, when you're in that kind of sporting situation, there's so much demand and so much pressure to get results, but obviously with that comes like normally people not cutting corners, but then it's just this very results driven, results focused attitude, whereas actually the health of the athlete in terms of longevity, etc., might actually be a better kind of guiding principle.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of think that really a lot of people push their recovery. I'm as guilty of it when I was playing as anyone else. You sort of going to physio and saying, how long? And the physio sort of saying, well, maybe this, if you hit this marker by then, we could be back by then. Actually, I think sometimes for, mental health as well, I think sometimes it's better just to still train, and you still got to do your rehab, but take yourself away from that situation. So, really in hindsight, I was all encompassed in getting back as quick as possible. I was in the gym, asking for as many sessions as possible, doing conditioning, and really looking at it, doing conditioning in November when I wasn't going to be back until August the year after, 10 months later, really, was there a need? I could have come in, done my rehab, done what I needed to do, and then taken myself away and maybe done something completely different, just to sort of take the stress away from just constantly thinking,
100%.
am I going to be back on September the 1st, ready for the start of the season? Because probably what you're doing extras around the rehab or the overtraining, like you say, is probably not making any difference. And it's probably just fatiguing you more, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Junk and just making you more susceptible. So just being really clear, like Chris Beardsley of strengthconditioningresearch.com has kind of really highlighted this. And I guess this is the whole evolution of understanding how the body works. And for anybody out there who's going into strength and conditioning research, like this is a real fatigue. Like we're so very good at understanding the loading part of the cycle now, but actually the recovery part, obviously stress plus rest equals growth. It's that recovery part where all the magic happens, and that's actually probably kind of going forwards the bit that people really need to be focusing on. So Mike, you've had some really awesome points there. So for anybody, any contact sport athletes out there, rugby players, lacrosse, whatever, there's some really real gold in there. So really appreciate your time for doing that, Mike. If anybody wants to get hold of you, where's the best place that they can find you? We can obviously leave a link in the description tab.
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. So Mike Macfarlane, search that. I'm on there. That's probably the best place to find me. Happy to chat to anyone, anything like that. Thanks for having me on.
No, brilliant. No, thanks, guys. So, guys, if you like the video, hit the like button for us, because obviously that helps with the YouTube algorithm. Also, hit subscribe and hit the notification bell as well if you like, so that when we have more kind of content based on training, lifestyle, mindset, then you'll be the first to get it. Mike, I really appreciate your time on this, buddy. Speak to you soon.
Cheers, mate. See ya.
Yes.